Hey, what's going on? I just wanted to show you guys some of what goes into the upkeep and use of Rivercane arrows versus, store-bought carbon arrows or whatever, whatever easier option you want to use. I just kind of was doing some spring cleaning and upkeep, and I thought I'd kind of show you guys what's going on here. So a lot of these are last year's arrows, and a lot of them are even older. And with cane arrows, there's a lot of upkeep. So from the fletching, well, we'll start with the shafts here. So these are from this year. A lot of times I'll bundle the shafts I harvest, like this kind of right here. This is a couple of years old, but not always, especially with this good local cane. There's japonica out here too you can find that's brought in, invasive, whatever you want to call it. But this is our, and I say our, like this in Southwest Louisiana, this is what you can kind of expect from the our native river cane. As far as harvested, it's not very green anymore. This is from probably early fall, but those kind of get worked down into something more like this. I use self-knocks. I wish it would focus for me. Let's see here. There you go. Self-knocks, and then that, see, that's just a rough cut off in there. Let's clean that a little bit. Focus. Here's some more. Here's a stage in between those two. Just kind of more or less cut a little long for being called cut to length, but you can see that taper I've got to put on it, and we'll talk about why that's important. But well, we might as well now. I kind of try to standardize my foreshafts. I think this one's hickory, but this one's hickory, but I'll use Yopon a lot for foreshaft material. You can see there's still kind of some sinew on the end there. That's just from being fitted. And you do your best, or at least I do, to kind of have a universal size for all this stuff, but it's not a perfect science. I try my best to keep it that way because like I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of upkeep. You break a lot of shit. You're going to break foreshafts, you're going to break points, for like this barbed old corner notch here. You can tell it's singular barb now as opposed to barbed plural. But anyway, so I use tail and wing, but here lately, last year, I got a hold of a lot more turkey tail feathers. So they kind of start like this, and you'll see it's rough. You can steam them, and that's typically what I do. I just got a little thing at Walmart for, with laundry supplies. And then they go from that stage to this stage, or this stage when I'm using wing feathers. And I just use a little piece of sinew there to bind match sets together, just to have some kind of organization. I like to keep like a little oyster shell. I have a couple of neat ones here. This is an oyster shell and a clam shell. And I just grabbed this one because it was in there. This is a fossilized oyster shell. You can see it's chirked now, but best I can tell, this was an oyster a long time ago, but perhaps not. Sure what it looks like to me. But yeah, I didn't make anything out of it. I thought it was cool to leave it like it is. But you get the question from time to time, where does chirk come from? How is chirk formed? It's the fossilized seabed, zooplankton, phytoplankton, and every once in a while you'll get crinoids or some other fossil kind of like that in there. Just thought it was kind of neat, and then I'd share it with y'all. All right, so some basic tools I like to keep in my kit, and I keep it in this back quiver here. Shoot, I guess we should start with sinew. So I'm gonna give y'all a hack for sinew. Like, this is how I used to do it when I was a kid, or pretty well the only access I could get to it. When your mama's making ribs, or me in this case, this is the membrane from the inside, the concave side of a rack of ribs, there's a little thin membrane, and if you're real careful, you can get like a tomato corer. You pull that out, and you strip the whole thing out, and then what I'll do is I'll tack it to just one of these 4x4s on the porch or something, and just let it kind of dry out in the sun, not in direct sunlight, but outside and out of the rain. Let it dry out like that, and then I'll pull the tacks out. This works real good, especially if you need to do a wrap. I'll show you here in a second, but like a lot of times I'll have a break in a shaft that I'll repair. Leaving it thick like this is great for binding that back together. So just a couple examples of those. As far as sinew hacks, there's one of them. And what I mean by hack is ways to get it other than cutting the leg tendon out of a deer on your own. And here's some other bits of sinew. This is leg tendon, but it's not from a deer. I figured out, so if you get like on 3 River site, which I use a little bit fairly often, I use it somewhat every year as far as getting archery tackle that I need. But if you go in there and you buy leg sinew, it'll be from a deer, and you're gonna pay 20 bucks for 2 tendons. But here's the hack for you. If you'll get on chewy.com, which was where we get dog treats and cat food, cat litter, stuff like that, you can buy beef leg tendon, and it comes in a 2-pack also, and I think it's $2.99 or $3.99, and it's every bit as good as deer sinew, if not a little longer, and I use it all the time. Now you got to process it, so I just kind of get a hammerstone, and I'll use it on one of these old pieces of limestone or whatever, and I'll just hammer it out at least enough to where I can kind of pull it into strips. So you hammer it a little bit, and you kind of get to this stage, and then you can pull strips off like this, which is what I'll use all the time for fletching these arrows. And a lot of times you'll get a piece that just won't cooperate, and that's all right. Don't throw your scraps away. You save every little bit like that. I keep them in this container. The reason is they're great for making hide glue. You just put them in a pot of boiling water, and you boil it until you boil all that water out of there. You get careful, you got to watch it so you don't burn it up. But when you get to the end there, as far as all the water boiled out, if you'll stop the heat then and just let that thin, gross, gelatinous layer kind of sit in the bottom of the pot. I put that out here on the porch too, let it dry up, and then you scrape this film off that comes out of it, and that's what you melt down and use for hide glue, which I also use all the time for these arrows. Yeah, I didn't even mention what I use these oyster shells to put like pitch in. Ooh, I think I forgot my pitch. Let me go grab it real quick. Hold on just a second, guys. Yeah, so anyway, they're good. You can heat them up with a little flame, like I did some mosquito candle burning out here is usually enough, but you can use a fire or heat gun, whatever you want to use. Get them hot, and it's a good spot to use to melt a little bit of your pine pitch. I make this too. Maybe I'll do a video on making that someday, but there's a lot of them out there. Anyway, it's good for that, or paint, or hide glue, whatever you want to use there. So we'll set that aside here. Just kind of go over some more of the regular tools of the trade. So we talked about the foreshaft. I like to keep on my pack, especially if I'm out actually hunting. I like to keep a couple of replacement points, pitch, hide glue, sinew, a couple of good sharp flakes are good for that. A couple of extra points, a couple of extra foreshafts, because again, the reality of using the stuff you make yourself, I mean, I would caution you to just keep in mind, don't think about how much money you're going to save unless your time's not worth anything to you, because you're going to spend some time on this shit. Anyways, so what I use a lot, especially for target shooting, I reach out here and that's my target I use the most. Oh yeah, on targets, I definitely recommend the instead of using just the cheaper Bahia, which you can see there, and how poorly it's held up. That's the same exact age as this alfalfa here I've used. And there's Maggie. But yeah, if you're gonna target shoot, stay away from these damn foam targets. These things they're crappy, man. Especially if you're using glue on points, which we're gonna get to here in a second. Glue on points. That's So I like to use these bodkins. And oh yeah, the reason I would caution you against those foam targets, yeah, they're cheap and they're easy, but they make a mess in your yard. And I mean, not that the hay doesn't, but you're getting grass in your grass versus little pieces of styrofoam that are, you know, they're there forever. You'll never get them all picked up, if you're me anyway. But I like to use these bodkins. I get these from Three Rivers. They come in a little pack. I think these are 190 grain. Come in a little pack like this. Let's see how. Let's see. Yeah, 190 grain. If you'd like to get some, that's what I'd. There's the info you need. Three Rivers Archery, their website, threeriversarchery.com, I think. Anyway, these are really convenient, but not for those damn foam targets. These points will do it too, but any kind of glue-on tip, man, they love to get that foam. You shoot them in that foam, and it loves to just kind of grab onto them, and you pull out a bare shaft. I'm sure I've got some examples I'll pull out of the quiver here in a second. So we talked about pine pitch. We didn't go into how to make it. There's plenty of stuff out there. This is what I like to use, make and use. It's cheap, and I've got a little stove, a little wood burning rocket stove I use, and I've got a pan that's dedicated to making pine pitch, because you'll never get the damn pine pitch out of your stuff. So just word of the wise there. If you want your wife to not put a pillow over your face when you're sleeping one night, have a dedicated pan for that, and don't get one of her good ones. All right, so put these away. These are ones I did to retouch some of the sinew on the fletching to keep them nice. I can tell these are older. My transitions are a little bit sloppier between the foreshaft there and the Rivercane. Hey Kayla, hey girl. And that I'm still using those older field tips. I hardly use these anymore, but I still have plenty of these laying around. Haven't broken or lost yet, so here they are. But yeah, where was I? Oh yeah, but yeah, I like to keep those around, and that high glue works really good too after you set a wrap of sinew. And I'll like to wait till it's cured, you know, because when you chew it, it's got its own glue there that it makes, but I just kind of reinforce it a little bit. Oh yeah, so another good tool to have around is a little glue spreader. You'll put both ends of one of these to use plenty often. Recommend it. It's worth a couple of bucks. Keep that around in my tackle kit there. Anyway, that's what those bodkins look like, and they are great for target shooting, especially into the hay bale. Got to kind of keep all my stuff for arrows together for gathering cane. This is my favorite tool. This is a curly maple. I set this handle in there myself, and this is sinew that I reverse twisted and everything, and that head's on there good, fully functional there. Woohoo! This is made out of I know some of you guys are probably into blacksmithing too. This is made out of the old plate that sits on those railroad ties that the railroad spikes get put down into, and that worked out real nice. Yeah, so thought I'd show that off a little bit there. I love this thing, and I take it out and use it and everything. Not to mention we're ready at a moment's notice to take Mel Gibson's spot should the British reinvade. They do still owe us a lot of money, I think, so who knows. Just kidding. Let's see. Keep a good knife. Keep a good sharp edge on your knife. It'll save you from a lot of cuts and a lot of doing things over. When you're working with these arrow shafts, you know, just processing them, stripping them down. This is old cheap pull saw. This one's actually broken the handle. I think this is a many years ago Harbor Freight special, but it's been used and abused, and hopefully it's got a couple more years of use and abuse ahead of it. So it was a good $4 or $5 investment. I keep chainsaw files around, not just for the chainsaw, but they work wonders for setting up your foreshafts and for your self nocks here. This is what I start them with. These are Harbor Freight specials too, but I got a couple of. I've got more than this, but these are the ones I find myself using a lot for, you know, my archery tackle stuff. Just a couple of. There's a kind of a scooped headed one, and that's just a slightly bent, kind of beveled. I use that for cleaning up you know, both the receiving end for the foreshaft to go in and getting ready for the final stages on the nocks. You can't do without some sandpaper. You got to have it. Yeah, keep some 120, even up to, you know, 80 grit around. You're going to use it. Keep a couple of sharp flakes around. These are great for not just, you know, oh, there go my arrows. Not just for cleaning up things on the shaft. They're good for, like this. See, this is a mid-processed as far as how far along it is shaft, and it's still got a lot of this waxy, mildewy stuff inside where one of the nodes has a sprout coming out of it. They're good for getting in there and cleaning it out without removing too much material. Beeswax, you know, keep this around. It's not just for your bowstring, which it kind of primarily is, but these are good for sealing. Like after you've sinew wrapped, hide glued, I use this as a sealant. And I also use like a little bit of fat, pork fat, beef fat, whatever. You'll see it on some of these better than others, but like for an unfinished shaft, I leave the waxy membrane on for my initial heat straightening. But a lot of times once I get the shaft ready for everything done on it anyways, but the fletching, and I've straightened it again for a final, just for waterproofing, I like to use a little, while the shaft's still hot, I like to rub in some oil. And you can use butter, WD-40, but any kind of animal fat works great. And you know, clearly I'm not totally primitive here, but it's more in keeping with, you know, the traditional availability, things that would have been available than just using WD-40 on it, which I'm not above that either. Alright, so we talked about all this stuff. We showed that off. I don't know, Adelaide I was working on this winter. Let's see how far I got. I haven't gotten any farther than that, but you know, you keep yourself busy. So this is a good tool. I use this one a lot more than this one, but these are pretty cheap on Amazon. Let me move my scalp taker here. These are pretty cheap on Amazon. This one's made to be kind of set into a board or a box, and you'll notice that they're tapered. This one's a little higher tech version of the same thing, but what these are is dowel makers, and I use this a lot more, especially with yopon or hickory, when I'm just trying to save a little time making foreshafts. You can bolt this down, and this particular one, you turn this little dial, you gotta loosen it in the back. There's a set screw in there, and you spin it around to where the blade edge is facing whichever, you know, size shaft you want to make. I think this, you know, we got metric and standard here, but yeah, you take your shaft to be, and you put one in the chuck of your drill, tighten it down, and you got to keep it straight. So there's a little bit of practice involved here, but you run that drill. I keep the speed fairly low with the torque up high, and you run it through. In this case, it'd be the 7/16 size. You run it through here, and it cuts your dowel as you know, running it through there. A lot of times I'll straighten it a little bit first, heat straighten it before I run it through there. But this is a good time saver, especially if you're talking about getting your knife or even a good stone flake like this and shaving meticulously, slowly, only to, you know, spend 25-30 minutes on something and realize, oh, you've gouged it and you've ruined it anyway. This is a good way to save time. If nothing else, you can get to the part where you ruin it and start over sooner than otherwise. All right, so we talked about hide glue, sinew hacks, having some good flakes around, beeswax, animal fat, having a shell around that you can heat up for paint. You can use it for wax too, you can use it for fat. I use it for pine pitch. Oh yeah, so earlier I talked about this. I won't get too detailed into it, but what I like to use for mine, pine pitch wise, is just straight up charcoal. So I'll get the black, good charcoal, usually oak, from the fire pit, and I'll kind of rub it. I use a cinder block. I'll rub it on top of a cinder block. You can use a glove if you're a wimp, but I'm used to it. You kind of rub it into a good powder, and I'll put that into the pan where I've melted down, or still have some melted down of pine sap. And I like to find, like, if you'll find a spot at the bottom of a pine tree, maybe where the lawnmower or a bush hog has scraped off a little bit of the bark, a lot of times early fall, when all the sap is running down, it's the best time to get fresh pine sap. You can get the old nasty stuff that's clearly been on the tree, on a wound on a pine tree for a long time, but I find that fresher is better, just as far as its ability to be a mastic, to be a good glue. But also, the less time it's sitting on the side of that tree before you collect it, the less shit that ends up in there. You know, you don't have as many bugs, you don't have as much dust, just impurities, things that aren't pine sap in there. So I would recommend getting as fresh as you can. Let's see what else. You can keep a good stone knife around. It's a good beater on tool, especially if you're just taking off the you want to scratch up some of that waxy surface on your shafts before you heat straighten it, or even, you know, pop those nodes off. Let's see, I think what we covered? Everything but the arrows themselves. So I mentioned and showed you guys those bodkins earlier. Let's take a look at some of these arrows. Alright, so here's a good example of why you don't shoot into foam targets. See, this is a fine arrow. This is several years old. I need to kind of touch the sinew up on that too. I reinforced the nocks on mine with sinew. I rough that up a little bit and then wrap it with sinew, let that set. I put a little hide glue, let that set, and put a little beeswax on it. You can see I like how, you know, each shaft looks a little different from the heat, you know, the heat straightening. Spots you got to get hotter than others. It's time to put a new coat of fat on this thing too, to seal it off. I think back then when I made this 2 or 3 years ago, I was still using mostly butter, but that right there that's where one of those bodkin points went into that foam target, and it's still there to this day. I've never got my knife out and dug it out. But yeah, so there's a good reason why. I'm gonna try to keep these older shafts together. A lot more of these are newer, and these are the bodkin points. So I talked earlier about what these this membrane sinew that I get from the inside of a rack of ribs, what they're good for, that wide stuff, that is really good when you have a break in an arrow like this one. I had a break right after the foreshaft had transitioned into the main Rivercane shaft, but the point was otherwise fine. That's definitely yopon. You can see how white that wood is. But anyway, just a little bit of hide glue and that wide pork sinew right there works wonders for repairing it. I've shot this hundreds of times after the fix, and you can see it's still together. I still got plenty straight on my shaft. Yeah. Oh yeah, I guess I could have mentioned that all of these are 2-fletch. It's just a time factor. It's easier to process. It's faster. And I've found that I tear up 2-fletch arrows at exactly the same rate that I tear up 3-fletch. So those are wing feathers right there. You can kind of see the difference between the wing and the tail. I don't leave that extra part dipped down. Yeah, I do find they're quieter. This one isn't trimmed up too much, but I want to talk a little bit about how important it is. See, you can see I had a split there, and I used some yopon shavings and some hide glue to repair where that was. Came out looking pretty cool, but that was a flaw. But I think it's worth mentioning, I wish this thing would focus, how important the transition, and this goes for stone points, of course, if not more than or just as much as, or if not more than using field points like this. That transition between your point and your foreshaft, and your foreshaft and your main shaft, it needs to be smooth. The low angle, long slope like that is best. If you get to where you've got a chunky foreshaft, a lot of times I used to have them like that, but I was breaking a lot more foreshafts. But what it was really hurting me on was penetration. You can see it in the hay bale. You go hunting hogs with it, you'll really see it. You'll get it into that shield a little bit on a big male, and you'll stick him in. You'll stick it in him that far, and that thing will just, it'll stop. And hog gets away. The only thing you get out of it is to repair one more arrow. If you're lucky enough to find it, he's run through the bushes and just torn it to pieces, and you get another one in the junk pile. But yeah, so this is just another example of the tail, turkey tail 2-fletch here. think most of these on this newer end are going to be wing fletched. Before I made that hide glue up there, I was running kind of low on it. I will use Sinew to do this. You can see this. I think the first time I remember seeing this was in that Kevin Costner Robin Hood movie, which is awesome. Except for some of the things that he does with the bow and arrows that are total nonsense. But I noticed that, like on those English arrows, those goose feathers or whatever those white feathers are, they're probably also goose. They'll have a piece of thread instead of a glued down fletch, or at least or maybe even in addition to a glued down fletch. But this works fine. Just start with, you don't want to have a bunch of sinew braided together. You know, you got to keep weight in mind, and you know, if it's a composite thread instead of just a long piece of sinew, it's gonna come apart. The first time you get that thing wet, it's gonna want to let go, and then you've got an arrow with. I never liked it. Some of mine will do it. I'm guilty of it. I'll have, you know, after it's set, they'll have a big gap in between here, and that makes a lot of racket. It works fine as far as flight, but I don't like the look of it. It makes a lot of racket. And the way around it is, when you've tied in, like I'll start with the rear on my fletchings, get them tied down. Once I've tied and that's set hard, I'll get a Q-tip and some salt water. And why salt instead of fresh water? Because it's salt water with a little bit of dish soap in it, even it's lower surface tension. You can think of it as it's wetter water, right? But I'll use that and like a Q-tip, and I'll soak the cleaned, and I keep the undersides good and clean. I'll use a flake as a real good tool for that too. Keep the underside real good and clean, scraped where you've got that pith exposed, and use that Q-tip to soak it. Just saturate the underside of that pithy part of the feather, and then pull, you know, one side at a time, of course. Pull it as tight as you can, bind it down, and do your first wrap. And a lot of times I'll even clamp it before I, you know, once I've got the first sinew kind of started well enough to hold it, I'll clamp it and hold it and let that dry a little bit before I do the same thing to the other side. And what it does is that when you've got it wet like that, that feather will stretch out a little bit, it'll open up a little more, and you get a good bind on it, tighten down. And I'll even go back and keep that feather wet while the sinew part is setting, because if you can get it to where that feather will dry and shrink back up after your bind is good and dependable here with your sinew and your, you know, hide glue and maybe your clamp if need be, you'll avoid having that gap. I'm trying to find an example of it. I'm sure I've got one. Oh, look, here's one. This gap right here, I hate that. It's a me thing. It's a cosmetic thing. It does make a little bit more noise, but if you can get that to where it sets here before that feather finishes drying and shrinking up, you'll wind up with a feather that will stay laid down like that, and you just won't have that gap. Yeah, so we talked about the transition there. Oh yeah, so like you'll notice on some of these arrows I've just got a random wrap of sinew. That's not a cosmetic thing. That's a spot where, like, maybe it was a node where I got a little overzealous with the sanding, and I recognized it as a weak spot. I don't have a spine tester, but when I've got an arrow that's flying a lot different, you know, when I'm shooting it down there at the target, flying a lot different than the other ones, I'll bend it and kind of try to get a good estimate of what's going on there. Maybe the spine is just so much looser because of one of those weak spots. I'll just kind of reinforce it. Or if, like, I'll notice a crack, you got to stay on top of it, because this, I mean, I shoot a pretty high poundage bow, especially that Hoyt there. Like, you will blow them up. I mean, I'd say nature's carbon fiber, but you can sure put one through your forearm accidentally, and that's not gonna be fun. Anyway, let's see if I've got any other examples of just being ahead of it, repair type things. I may not have any here. Here's another example of a wrap in lieu of having the glue I wanted to have. There's another one. A lot of these are wing feathers. It just happened to be what I could get my hands on at the time. That one's cockeyed. I need to fix that. Got a little too much twist on one side compared to the other. I guess the only one I've got here, as far as examples, that same repair I did with that pork membrane sinew from that rack of ribs. But yeah, just thought I'd share some of that stuff on archery tackle with you guys. I love shooting Rivercane arrows. I love the process of making them, but it takes a lot of time. And so just keep in mind, if you're strictly into this for interest beyond, you know, having some connection to how it once was done, and if you're thinking at any point that this makes more sense to do it you know, this way, because you're not buying the shafts, well, I mean, just consider what your time's worth, because just this, you know, dozen or so arrows I've got here, this represents a lot of a big investment of time and effort. And there's a pile that I don't have here in front of the camera of things that didn't go my way, broken shafts. A lot of times when I do my final straightening, heat straightening on the shafts, I'll get to where, you know, I've spent a lot of time getting it exactly how I want. Oh, there's a good example. Look, see, here's a weak spot I've got that needs to have some sinew backed up on it. Anyway, let me finish the previous thought. If you've got it in your head that you're going to save money doing it this way versus just buying arrows, you will, but you're going to spend time. So just keep in mind what your time's worth should be factored into your decision-making process. So look, see this little spot, little crumpled up, cracked looking zone right here? It's not going to focus for me. That's almost certainly from straightening that shaft. You know, you heat it up. I like to heat it all the way around as evenly as I can, but then I'll really put the heat on the side that's going to be compressed. So like if I've got a bow this way in a shaft, I know that I need to bend it up like that. Well, the side that's going to be compressed is the underside, because as I bend it, you know, bend it like that, it's going to stretch on the top into that arc, and it's going to compress the wood at the bottom. That's the side you want to have more heat on, where it's going to be squished together. And a lot of times, like in this case, I succeeded in getting the bend I needed to straighten out that shaft, but I also succeeded in creating a flaw here. That's a weak spot. That's going to break there. Now maybe it breaks when I fire it, maybe it breaks when I miss my target, I miss a hog or a deer and I hit a tree. Maybe it breaks when I let go of that string and this snaps off and it shoves this into my forearm, and I, you know, cry all the way home or to the hospital. That's a good example of a piece that you need to reinforce with a wrap of sinew, just like this right here. Anyway, I think that's all I got. Just wanted to show you guys some of that today. I'll take it easy. Later.